Welcome, everybody. We are just going to give it a few more moments while we wait for everybody else to arrive. But thank you so much for joining us for this webinar and this procurement. I'm going to stall a little bit before I start properly introducing the session, just to make sure everybody's through the virtual door, as it were. So bear with me as I kind of talk some nonsense for a few moments while we wait for a few more people to arrive. Brilliant. So my name is Jessie Wilde, and if you don't know me, if you haven't met me before, I'm one of the directors of the Housing Festival, and I'm really delighted actually to be able to have you join us today for this webinar. Really, this webinar the focus is procurement as a strategic enabler to building homes by MMC. So hopefully you've signed up to the right webinar, and that's what you're expecting to be here for. But this webinar is part of a series of events marking a new chapter of Building Better. So Housing Festival and Building Better are coming together to bring you Building Better, a community of practice. We are completely committed to innovation, collaboration and aggregation for the sake of the delivery of social and affordable housing. And this new community of practice really is an exciting opportunity to learn and to share, to work together across the growing membership to really unlock that innovation and the delivery that's needed, that we need to see for the increase in social and affordable housing delivery. So we're going to be asking a number of questions and exploring a number of topics and themes over the next year or so, and we're really keen to draw people in who are committed to social and affordable housing delivery. So if you're keen to know more about the community practice Building Better, please do look at the Building Better website. It's been refreshed to explain more about what this community of practice is. You can find out what's coming up in terms of events and things coming and conversations coming up, and how to apply to be a member, which is completely free to join, and that'll give you access to the members only area. There's ways to connect in with other members, but also be part of the conversations on an increased level if you commit to being a member. But that's enough about that. Let me talk to you specifically about this webinar. Today, we are specifically focusing on how procurement can be a crucial enabler for the delivery of social and affordable homes, particularly through the use of MMC. And procurement plays a really pivotal role, actually, doesn't it, in shaping the future of housing. And by moving beyond the traditional sort of lowest cost tendering towards a strategic values-driven approach, it really can unlock innovation, MMC, scalability. We can unlock DFMA and standardization and accelerate the delivery of high quality sustainable homes at scale. So I'm delighted to say that for this session, we're bringing together both the client and the supplier perspectives to explore how smarter frameworks and long-term partnerships can create those opportunities, as we're talking about, for seeing procurement move into that really strategic and enabling role. It can help create that certainty and the collaboration needed to embed things like modern methods of construction, both your panelised systems, but also some of those other elements across the sector. But particularly, we want to look today on focusing on and asking questions about how we enable the delivery of small sites through those procurement methods and through the aggregation of those sites. At Housing Festival, we've been committed to exploring aggregation of small sites to enable innovation and standardisation and MMC and the delivery of social and affordable housing for a little while now. And we launched about 18 months ago a playbook known as the Social Housing at Pace MMC playbook, working with over 60 people to develop this playbook and this idea around how we enable aggregation of small sites. Since then, the Lloyd's Social Housing Initiative has been working across industries to explore ways to accelerate social housing, and one of the projects that they have been investing in is the Small Sites Aggregator, which has now been picked up by MHCLG and is being run by them. This project, the Small Sites Aggregator, is aiming to really use innovative public-private partnerships to tackle some of the commercial and planning barriers to 2 small residential developments, aggregating, again, here we come back to that aggregating of small sites to deliver homes. But one of the key and crucial elements of that is procurement and how that's going to be unlocked. But the small sites aggregator is starting with pilots in Bristol, Sheffield and the London Borough of Lewisham, and that's going to roll out from there. Anyway, this is enough for me, enough of setting the focus and the tone. But I'm going to now hand over to the panel. I'm going to let them each introduce themselves to tell us who they are, where they come from, what their role is, and say a little bit about what their kind of input is here into this conversation around procurement. Once we've heard from each of the panelists, there will be opportunity for Q&A. So as you're listening in, please do put your questions in the chat. You'll see that you've got a Q&A box. It should be at the top of your screen. You should have a Q&A box. Please do add questions in there, and I will put the questions to our panelists after they've done their introductions and as we go. All right, I think that's everything, everyone. So Jake, can I come to you first?
Thanks, Jessie. Hi, everyone. So my name's Jake Snell. I'm a client, and I guess my position here today is to talk from a client perspective. What is our experience, or what's my experience, and what the barriers and concerns, and what solutions have sort of worked, certainly in that procurement space. So I work for Abri Housing Group. For those that don't know, we are a housing association that cover the south of England. We've got about 55,000 homes and assets, and last week, if you asked me, I'd have said we deliver 1,000 new homes a year. However, we've just hot off the press, we've just launched our new corporate strategy, and it's a very bold and ambitious strategy, which is we're doubling that capacity. So we're going to deliver 2,000 homes a year. We'll also have 3 top 5 kind of agenda items, which are one of the top 5 housing associations by scale. So we're going to continue to grow over the next 5 years. We'll be top 5 by places to work, and we'll be top 5 by customer satisfaction. So real sort of ambitious sort of growth there, and sort of ambition from the team. I've sat, I guess, both in the development sort of space and the strategic asset space, so have quite a broad sort of understanding. And prior to sort of my involvement in the social housing world, I was actually a contractor, so sort of seen the client sort of gamekeeper turned poacher, or vice versa, poacher turned gamekeeper kind of experience. So I'll just sort of briefly run through kind of experience and the sort of market context, some of the barriers that we've kind of navigated, some key concerns, and what's worked well and what we're kind of working on next as well. So as a bit of a starting point, we're pretty well versed now, I guess, at sort of delivering MMC. We've delivered multiple modular schemes, including a 123 unit scheme by Ilka. It was a few years ago now, and very luckily it was prior to their insolvency. We've also delivered, and we are delivering, a Booklock site. However, we've gone through a bit of the challenges there with the issues around Top Hat. So we sort of suffered, but we've also borne out some achievements in the modular space. We also have an in-house build team. So we have a contractor that works for us generally in and around the sort of the Southampton area. They build around 250 homes for us. And we've also taken those guys and girls on the MMC journey, but that's been very much an incremental journey, and it's been very positive. So by using the procurement platform, the Building Better and Procurement for Housing platform, we've actually been able to enable a really risk kind of view approach to how we do that, with the skills and experience of those sort of members of Abri Build. And we actually successfully delivered a site of 66 units using the H+H monolith Cat 2 solution. So a baby step in innovation, but the right move for us to sort of to take Abri Build on that journey, and we continue on that journey today. We've also delivered a myriad of different sort of developer-led schemes, or including hundreds of timber frames and some other larger scale sort of light gauge steel solutions as well. Some of the barriers, I guess, that we faced, of course, it is providers' instability and insolvency, which has really impacted the confidence and continuity of kind of what we're trying to do. And I think the challenge is that we've seen so many that actually it's had a knock-on effect to all of the solutions. So as soon as you mention MMC, everyone kind of reverts to the modular world and all of the insolvencies that have been front and center with all of the kind of the news articles and stuff of the last couple of years. But MMC, of course, does introduce sort of a different risk profile versus trad. Less established supply chains, inoperability concerns, resilience of single system providers. So there are some real risks that we as clients really do need to navigate. And also we also do need to sort of avoid overexposure to those small number of major suppliers. So again, there's just another risk that we need to sort of overcome or navigate. And of course, cost still is a challenge to us. So even with the perceived sort of benefits, or assumed benefits, should I say, of time of delivery, there's so many other factors that can affect that actually the MMC solution could be amazing and really does achieve those benefits, but actually, I don't know, the ground worker doesn't keep up, or there's issues of the various issues on site that sort of slows that down and even goes past the original sort of contract. So that's a barrier that we're still trying to button down and evidence the evidence trail sort of behind it. What works well, and I think if we talk in the context of the procurement, because that's what we're sort of talking around today, we continue to deliver and have tenders through the Building Better Procurement for Housing framework, which is really effective and really efficient. We've used the framework and are currently live on the framework with 2 category 2 solutions, which are both will provide a turnkey solution. So i.e. working with a contractor, because that's out of the area of operation of Abri Build. And we are looking to deliver 180 unit site and 100 unit site. And that's now at quite advanced stages of planning, which is really exciting. What we're trying to achieve there is that we're encouraging principal contractors to sort of come forward and encourage them to bring the innovation that they choose, rather than us forcing them down the road in which they're maybe less comfortable. So that means that we can maintain the value and quality that comes out the other end. Tony, I'm going to pin you out here to say Tony's actually exceptional and such a helping hand to us, especially and my colleagues here at Abri. Really proactive in his approach, really knowledgeable, and really helps kind of that active engagement with our contractors and suppliers, and really does lean into that social kind of market and understand all of the local kind of areas and the demands that's needed. So I thank you to Tony and the team there for kind of taking a lot of that workload away from us and a lot of that pain and kind of challenge that otherwise we'd have to do sort of on our own. And then so as I said, we've got multiple sort of tenders out through the framework, and we're expecting to see those sort of tenders returns in the next sort of few months. So we're really excited on that. And again, because it's a DPS, we can have the options to nominate some contractors to actually say, look, we're really interested, but we need a compliant route to market, go and engage with this. And of course, keeping our powder dry, we do approach a kind of a proper quality versus cost and get the best value for money out of the other end for us. But it does help remove that procurement challenge. It does help to kind of tick the boxes and dot the I's as well in terms of our due diligence, because that's done via sort of Building Better and PFH, which is fantastic. So I guess just sort of closing, my initial kind of update is that despite the MMC market, which is a bit challenging at the moment, our recent projects show that with the right partners and procurement routes, we can actually manage the risk and still deliver strong outcomes. Our pipeline is positive, and I'm confident our approach will keep broadening our options and strengthening delivery as we move forward. There are compounding elements to that: stimulation from Homes England, encouraging the business to sort of really look at the results and the outcomes that we get. And we're really starting to think around post-occupancy evaluations and what measures we can truly look at to really see the value of delivering MMC. So that's it from me. Looking forward to opening the conversations a bit later on.
Thanks so much, Jake. Rehan, should we come to you?
Yeah, thanks very much. So Rehan Khodabuccus, Operations Director at ZPOS. So we've been working in this sphere. We're coming up to 10 years since we originally started the company back in 2016, but delivering schemes sort of really in earnest since the late sort of 2018 time. One I think was good from Jessie's introduction is that we've worked on.
Rehan, sorry, Rehan, can you put your mic down? You need to just flip your mic down on your. Have you got a microphone there? Yes.
Yeah. Is that a little bit better?
Yes, mate. You're in the room now.
Brilliant.
Perfect.
Apologies for that.
No, keep going.
Yep. So we've actually been looking at and working on. We took a different route to some of the larger providers that have sort of had more of the high profile failures by looking at those smaller sites, looking at how we build a pipeline up of schemes using smaller schemes. So we've delivered around 134 units, which is just over 250 bed spaces across 12 sites. So you can imagine they're sort of, those smaller sites between 5 and 10 units. We brought those together and we looked at building a pipeline, and we've sort of doubled that pipeline going forwards over 11 more sites as well. And that's just with a single client. So by looking at those elements and building up our pipeline to keep those overheads down and keep that factory churning over has been a really, really important factor in sort of our success as a modular house builder and a principal contractor. But in terms of the framework side of it and the procurement side of it, I think it's very important to have great relationships with your framework provider and really understand the people behind those frameworks, what their drivers are and how they can help you deliver a project going forwards. We've worked with a number of different framework providers, and having that relationship is critical, especially if you're looking at things like direct awards and looking at how they support SMEs through that procurement process. One of the good things I think as well that we've seen recently is a much more stronger switch to a value-based approach and a quality-based approach rather than a race to the cheapest, lowest possible economic value. And I think that really brings into play a lot of the other things that we've been doing, such as working with charities such as Business Building Homes, where we've had 35 prisoners on remand go through a training scheme within our factory. We've given out 24 MVQs, a number of different forklift truck drivers licenses, depending on what the marginalised community wants to achieve. And we've reduced reoffending rates in that from the national average of around 25 to 35% to below 1%. So it shows that things like that does work. And by switching to a value-based approach really helps us to bring those things to the forefront, as well as sort of looking at our ESG in terms of delivering zero carbon in operation, or going further down the line of full net zero carbon homes as well. Getting those things recognised really then leads to having a metric, if you like, that looks at how every £1 spent through a framework, actually what the social value is that's delivered. And we're delivering up to sort of £8 worth of social value from that £1 spent. And we couldn't do that if it wasn't for a value-based approach on that. We've sort of looked in the market, we've built incrementally, if you like, from a solid foundation of looking at those smaller sites, getting a number of different schemes across the board, getting those together, building a pipeline up on that, so we're not relying on one major site or one big scheme to push us through, and now doing larger schemes and bigger schemes going through as well. In terms of some of the barriers, I still think there's a perception that looking at MMC differently to other forms of construction, really we're an industrialized form of construction. We're looking at delivering homes to a higher quality. We're looking at delivering homes quicker. We're looking at delivering homes more efficiently. We're looking at how you work within that full industrial ecology of right from procurement through to handover to delivery, looking at that post-occupancy evaluation. We build a lot of post-occupancy monitoring and data sensors into our buildings as well to do that, to make sure that what we're doing is performing. And that really helps as a sort of as a modular builder show the additional value we can provide, especially when you look at things like AWAB's law that's come in and how we look at controlling mold growth and having those monitors in there and actually helping our local authority clients getting ahead of those elements. If you put those to the forefront of procurement, you're going to get better outcomes at the end. And people like us, in terms of modular, with full digitalized quality control measures, full digitalized production control measures, full golden thread involved in it, the fact that we're actually principal designer for building regulations as well as CDM, how we improve the safety aspects in those, bringing those to the forefront as well, really means that, again, working with your framework provider can bring those forwards from a supplier point of view. And we want to be looking at frameworks that promote that higher quality, higher level of quality. So really just looking at that and sort of handing over. Yes, we've been looking at aggregating small sites. We've done it for a while. We're doing it going forwards. Procurement is key to that, especially when you're looking at things like direct awards, but working with the right procurement partners and framework providers is especially critical.
Thanks so much, Rehan. That's brilliant. Andrew, let's come to you.
Thank you, Jessie. Hello, everyone. All you faceless names, but lovely to be here. I'm Andrew. I'm one of the directors of the Housing Festival, but also the Temporary Accommodation Transformation Manager in Bristol City Council at the moment. So, yeah, probably a little bit less close to large scale developments as Jake. And I'm appreciating how warm your office must be, Jake, that you're just in a polo shirt there, and Rhian's in a gilet. They're treating you right there. Obviously, it's mandatory for Rehan because he's got the logo on, so I can appreciate that. Anyway, so for me, it is around pace of delivery for temporary accommodation, because time is money in that world. How can we try and get additional supply of good quality housing on meanwhile use sites on land that's available but that we can't necessarily deliver ourselves or don't have the time to wait for. And we've been on sort of the bit I wanted to talk about was how you transition from innovative models of delivery that maybe will be smaller in scale, perhaps fall outside of procurement regs because of their scale, bringing that inside then when you want to upscale it and bring it onto a bigger scale. How do you then drive that into procurement? And what we've actually experienced very positively is the appetite from framework providers to learn, to adapt, to adjust, to upskill around innovative models of delivery, to sort of tweak their processes, give advice, give steers on how they can sort of shape what they're doing. Really click with what Jake's saying around the dynamic purchasing being really key, the DPS being really essential to bring people on at pace, for it to be able to encourage us to engage with suppliers as well of the right kind of size. And we've been working really hard in Bristol, again through Prisoners Building Homes, which has been a key link for us around that added social value, but wanting to work with the SMEs out there and finding ways to do that. A DPS has been really useful for us to engage with the right kind of size of partner. There are challenges with procurement. I'm by nature of my role desperately impatient, and so I have to be careful not to see that kind of, the procurement legwork as just unnecessary delay. But actually, my experience has been that there's been a lot of added value and a lot of potential errors cut early, seen ahead of time through the process, through the checks and balances that have gone through, and the ability for the feedback and the improvement from providers giving feedback as we've been going through a tender process has been invaluable, and actually has really helped us to improve the way we've been doing things. So that's a bit of an overview from a sort of a slightly different delivery route in temporary accommodation, because it's the pressure is forcing pace. But yeah, happy to answer questions. But otherwise, back to my esteemed colleague Jessie Wilde.
Thanks so much, Andrew. And Tony, last but not least, let's hear from you.
Just my luck, the phone goes off in the background as I'm about to speak. Hold on 1 second. I'll ignore it. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, can't hear the phone at all.
Yeah, well, hi everybody. My name's Tony Woods. I'm the technical manager at Procurement for Housing. My background is I'm a civil engineer. I've worked in off-site housing now for coming up for 20 years. Spent 10 years of those working for contractors delivering projects using off-site systems, and the last 10 years or so has been doing procurement for off-site and developing off-site solutions, procurement solutions for people. Been working with Building Better now for about the last 4 or 5 years. It's been a bit of an emotional ride because we've had a number of failures in the industry, which I guess we all know and love to a certain extent, which has impacted us as we've gone along. But it's been a great learning curve working with Building Better and people like Jake and the team to get, under the bonnet. So look at some of these issues. So I'll try and run through. I've made a few notes as everybody else has spoken. So a couple of people touched on when we're talking about it, MMC can be quite emotive, and it brings out sort of concerns and issues and talk about failures. But when you're talking to some of the members, I think one of the issues we've had is we deliver about 35,000 houses a year through RPs and stuff like that. Probably about a third of those are through development agreements, land-led deals, another third are 106, and then another third are direct procurements. And it's quite interesting because those development agreements, land-led deals, and the 106, we don't tend to ask the question how they've been built. And that's where timber frame, light gauge steel frame, going to a developer has got a package. We don't ask them that. We just look at the end results. Whereas if we're going to procure it ourselves and we talk about MMC, everybody starts making hard decisions and looking very stern and wondering whether it's the best thing to do. But probably most RPs have got a large proportion of off-site housing. So when you look at that side of things, if you look at the private sector house builders, most of the big house builders build with timber frame. Most of them have got their own factories. They're already looking at these issues from the point of view of skill shortages and things like that. So it protects them being able to build the houses they need to. And if we look north of the border into Scotland, if any of them are sober after last night in the football match, 85% of the houses in Scotland are built with timber frame. So it can be done. It shouldn't be a barrier. It should be, I think as Rehan said, industrialised housing. It's about being more efficient how we build. So we should move away from that and just focus on how can we deliver these properties going forward. So I think one of the things we've been doing over the last few years is assisting organisations to look at the plethora of possible solutions out there and working out what the best way is to achieve where they want to go. I think in the past we've been very much sort of manufacturer led, but the trouble is a lot of manufacturers, they're good at manufacturing certain things, but when it comes into building sites and things like that, there'll be, if you take the 80-20 rule, they might be able to do 80% of the site, 20% of the site becomes quite difficult. So allowing manufacturers to focus on being manufacturers and then working out what the best solution is for those sites. When we start to talk about aggregation of demand for small sites, it's looking at, is there, there's probably not a silver bullet that's going to deliver all those sites. So you need a range of solutions to be able to deliver those sites. And it's looking at then leveraging with the manufacturers to say, what is the most efficient solution for a particular site? It could be access that's an issue. It might be great, you can fit modular units on there, but can you actually get the modular units to the site because of road access and things like that? Has the site already got some planning on there? If it's already got planning on there, if you spent 2 years trying to get planning permission for a site, the last thing you want to hear from a manufacturer is, well, we need to go back in planning again. So what solutions can you use based on where the site's located and whether you've already got the planning permission? The utopian world, as Rehan would tell you, is that it's a blank sheet of paper and we could go and do that. And that's where you get the true, value engineering of things. It's easier to adjust lines on a piece of paper than it is, we get caught up in value engineering, which is actually not value engineering. It's too expensive. How do we make it cheaper? That's not what it's about. And I think the other thing about, we're trying to move it as well to look at whole life costing. So it might be slightly more expensive what you're doing, but over the life of that building, and this is the big difference with public sector, is you're going to have that asset for the next 60 years. So you've got to maintain that asset. So it's trying to get the link between the development team who are tasked with delivering all those units and the asset management people who sometimes turn around and say, oh God, what have you got us this time? Particularly when it comes to things like 106 housing. you know, with things like heating systems and stuff like that. So working with procurement to say how can we improve the outcomes as well, and looking at things like, you know, whole life costing. And as we've touched on, we've got a range of solutions now through Procurement for Housing. So we've got frameworks, we've got the DPS, but then it's working with clients and people like Jake to say, well, can we bring on other suppliers who can help with that? So again, it's about matching suppliers with the particular project. So if you've got small sites, you need people who are quite agile, who are willing to take those on. If you go to a large contractor, they're probably not willing to do the smaller sites, and the cost involved for them to do that is not viable for them. So it's making sure you've got that range of solutions to deliver those smaller sites. And I think the other thing as well is having that conversation. I think Andrew touched on it, is particularly if you're looking at temporary accommodation, you know, time is important. So if you can shrink the amount of time down, then actually, you know, the added value you get from something, it might be slightly more expensive to build, but you're actually going to save money overall because you can deploy that solution quicker onto the site. So you've got people in accommodation quickly. So you've got the financial benefit, but you've also got the intangible, which is actually we've got people out of temporary accommodation, you know, which might be hotels or things, into that new accommodation. And I think the other thing we found, where we've been speaking to some other organisations about putting temporary accommodation in, it's looking at the quality of what you're doing. You know, so making, there's two parts to that. So the people that are going into the temporary accommodation don't feel as though there's a stigma that it looks like temporary accommodation, you know, because some of the solutions that have been out in the market draw attention to it. You know, we've had shipping containers and things like that in the past. And then the other side is from the point of view of the community that it's actually going into, that it actually blends in. So it isn't something that draws attention to it as well. And that's something over time we've been working with clients to say, well, how do we evolve that to find the right solutions that you need to be in that location? And I guess touching on Andrew's point, I think that early engagement with procurement and talking about, you know, the projects at the early stages to bring them in is an important step, because I think a lot of people see procurement as a blocker because they tend to go and do all the hard work, and then somebody reminds them that they need to sort that out, so they leave it to the very end of the process. And I think one of the things I'll just touch on here as well is that with the changes in the procurement regulations, the Procurement Act came in March this year. So one of the things that will occur is that you have to publish a pipeline notice for every project you do over £2 million now. So I suggest most construction projects will have that. So you're going to have to publish that. So which means that the procurement teams in the organisations are starting to come to the development teams and say, well, what's going on? What is happening? Because we've got to start to identify that and publish it. So it's going to change the approach. And coming back to your point, Andrew, it's going to bring procurement to work alongside, and that's where we really like to be, is working alongside people at the earliest stage to say, well, what do you want to achieve? How we can achieve that? What solution do we need to do? And then you can build in, well, what's the added value that we need to incorporate, social value, supply chain? Do we need to involve, you know, additional suppliers, get those onboarded into the DPS? So there's a lot more to be done. And if you're under the new regulations, you've also got things like contract management that has to be in place as well. So again, it's looking at which set of regulations you use. So a lot of the frameworks that are about at the moment are still under the old regulations, which makes that attractive to a lot of organisations. But as you go forward, you're going to be under the new regulations, which is far more transparent and adding to the workload for people. So we try and see it as being that critical friend, working with people to work out what you want to achieve, but what is the best solution for those particular sites. And I think with this aggregation that you're talking about with those small sites, as I say, it's not going to be one silver bullet that's going to be able to deliver all of that. You need probably a combination of solutions that can work across those, depending where you are. And for each site, you know, it's going to be slightly different. So I guess they're my thoughts to throw into it as a starting point.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Tony. Thank you so much. Please do put any questions that you have for our panel into the chat, and I'll kind of try and weave those in and put them towards the panel as we go. But I do want to pick up on a few different things. I think first of all, thank you so much for your input, all of you. I think it's really helped to shape the conversation. But I think we've got to address first up and foremost the elephant in the room. Everybody has mentioned in some way, shape or form some sort of failure when it comes to MMC or MMC providers or category ones or whatever, what have you. We've all recognised that there has been some interesting stories over the last few years. So why are we fighting for this? I think particularly, you know, looking at you, Jake, and looking at you, Tony, why do we still want to work with industrialized construction, looking at standardization? Why do we want to build that into what's the win? We've got a lot of stories about barriers and risks and all that kind of stuff, but what really is the win of this, and why is it so important? Now, I'm obviously sold, and I know why I am fighting for it, but it'd be lovely to hear from you. Perhaps first, Jake, and then Tony, to hear from you in terms of why you bother to have these frameworks that enable this kind of innovative build. And Rehan as well, it'd be great to hear from you as a supplier of this. Why is it so good? Go on, Jake.
You're going to get me on my soapbox, Jessie, in a minute.
Please.
I guess fundamentally we have to. So the government promote huge numbers of properties and homes that needs to be delivered and shout about sort of numbers, etc. So great. And then we see, okay, well, what the barriers in the way? Well, we'll open up planning, we'll do this, we'll do that. Well, there are thousands of homes that have already got planning that are not being delivered. Even if we did open up land and government just kind of deployed a whole strategy to say, look, we've just got to build these homes. We just simply haven't got the tradespeople to be able to deliver them. So we could argue all day long around quality, and I think quality is a perceived output of building in a factory. I wouldn't want my car to be built on a muddy old field. So why do we always have this same notion of, well, houses have been built like that for centuries, so let's continue down this same odd route? The irony, as I talk to you guys through a camera in a screen of this innovation that just seems to be driving forward with more pace than anything else. But the assets and the most important and high valued investment that any of us were going to make, or homes to live in for those people that just rent or can't kind of buy their own homes, we're not investing in the sort of that future innovation. So I think there's two things which, the average age of a bricklayer is somewhere in the mid sort of 50s. There's no real stimulation or drive for young people to go into the industry. Where sort of CITB do advertise or promote people going into the industry, it kind of blows my mind that it's not about sustaining, say, being a bricklayer, and that's an amazing career for the rest of your life. Then more stimulating people to say, what's the next step after that into sort of surveying, where I think there needs to be a huge marketing deployment if we're going to sort of change what we're faced for in the future. So I think there's not a want, but there's an absolute need. We have to change. There's no other way around it. We are driving forward with innovation on all of the different aspects of our living experience, and our housing delivery has to be a sort of a driving force of that in the long run.
That's great. Thanks, Jake. Tony.
Well, I think I agree with Jake. If you look at big house builders, private house builders, they are changing how they build because they need to. Again, the skill shortage is one of those. Performance is another one as we move to net zero carbon with future home standard and beyond will mean that we'll have to change how we build. And I think it's quite interesting that those private house builders are already shifting down that route and saying actually it's more efficient for us to do it differently now than the way we've done it in the past. I think again, some of those failures have been because it's seen as a panacea to put a bit massive factory in place with, you know, capacity of thousands of houses. But again, as we know from this group, you know, and Andrew will say, getting those aggregation of small sites together is quite difficult. And as we touched on, not all the sites are the same. Not one solution is going to fit on all those sites. So where do you end up? You know, go back a few years, we had probably 4 or 5 with capacity of about probably 25,000 units, something like that. Your social housing provides 35,000. You know, so there's massive overcapacity, and I think it's interesting. We've got the Z Pods here who've taken it steady. I've sort of been working with them and following them over the last 10 years. You know, they started small, they came up with their concept. They actually initially worked with manufacturers, so they were subcontracting the work out until they got to a point of having a pipeline that made it justified having a factory in place, which is, you know, a sensible step for people to go. So I think there's been, you know, lots of bells and whistles about these wonderful factories, and they've all been on the news and things like that. But it's having the fundamental understanding of how the housing market actually works. You know, at the end of the day, it will always start with somebody in a pair of wellies and always will finish with somebody in a pair of wellies. You know, you can't get away. You've still got the human interface, and there's still somebody on a building site somewhere. So, you know, we need to learn from what the private house builders do, because they're the successful one. You know, they're the ones who are building the largest proportion of the housing. And as Jake said, we've got all these targets. But I think if you look back at 2019, we hit about 240,000 houses, which is about as high as we've had for the last 40 years. There was an article a couple of weeks ago which showed there's about another 15% of the workforce has dropped out of the construction industry. So we're under about 2 million people now. So it's actually worse than it was then. You know, so so we've got to be more efficient. You know, we've got less people, but how can we be more efficient, you know, to get more out of those people that we've got, while we try and work out how we get more people back into the construction industry itself. You know,
that's great. Thanks, Tony. Rehan, did you want to add anything to that topic?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's nice to sort of be a linking pin in the conversation, I suppose, between the different elements. But really, what do we want to do at the end of the day? We want to deliver the highest quality homes with the lowest environmental footprint in the most efficient way as possible. And then we want to bring in those different aspects of the whole life costing aspects and the whole life performance aspects as well. So how we monitor, how we do that post occupancy evaluation side of it as well. And that's really what we're trying to do, whether it's one form of construction over another. What we're trying to do is the most efficient way possible. We believe that modular is the way to do it. We have managed to almost eliminate paper within our factories. So we have barcodes on every single module. People go around with an iPad, scan that barcode, brings all the drawings, all the quality sheets up, everything like that towards the for that module, for that construction method. Which sort of links more what the new incumbents that we're trying to attract into the market want to do. They want to sort of see that technology is being involved, being deployed. Even it's just a case of how we look at drawings on a module and how we do that. And it's important to engage with people like that. And sort of, as Tony say, yeah, we start off with wearing the Wellington boots at the beginning, going through doing all that site enabling works and, you know, looking at the utilities and making sure that there's nothing we don't want to see in the ground, do the stuff off site and then bring that together at the end and then do all the landscaping at the end. So we want to do that holistic approach. And I think really looking at it and sort of why I like that term industrialized construction is it is an industrialized philosophy that encompasses many different ways. And we're going to need all of those different tools and levers to be able to deliver the housing that we need going forwards.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. We've got questions coming in thick and fast, which is brilliant. And so I'm going to start with a question from Claire French, and I'm going to direct this to Jake and Andrew particularly. But as a customer, what is the biggest barrier to using a framework? So as customers, what do you find is the biggest barrier to using a framework, particularly bearing in mind your kind of outputs and your goals in delivery? Jake, do you want to go first and then over to Andrew?
Yeah, sure. I think it's I think it's just access to the right frameworks and understanding of what they can deliver. So I've certainly found that you need to stimulate people to access the right frameworks, but also believing in that framework and understanding it. So I guess procurement is, as Tony quite rightly put it, it can be perceived as a real pain in the bottom for people, and it's just another hurdle in which you've got to navigate. So I think it's almost breaking down the barriers. So a barrier is the lack of understanding of what a framework can deliver and how it does deliver. So I think it's just the barrier is about how do we promote them more? How do we promote what they do? How easy they can work, how difficult they can also be at sometimes. But from a client's perspective, I think it's to make the procurement route easier, the more that you know what you want the outcomes to be, that certainly does make that procurement route significantly easier. That said, with some of the sites that we're currently working on through the DPS and framework at the moment, we're kind of going out to the market saying, what can you deliver for us? We know our outputs wants to be some low-rise housing, fantastic. How would you deliver it from us? And how much is that going to cost? So there's a few barriers there, but there's also some optimism there and some more positive outcomes that can come from procurement. So rather than us trying to invent the wheel, there's a platform in which you can actually you can work through to enable that.
That's helpful. Thanks, Jake. Andrew.
Yes. So maybe a slightly different tack here. I actually think corporate memory is a bit of a challenge with this one. So, and what I mean by that is that so in a local authority setting, you do a successful procurement to deliver a scheme, but there can be quite a relatively high turnover of staff, and so for people who you almost get a process or a procurement pathway that outlasts the people who are actually using it to deliver the units. So when someone new comes in and they sort of go, okay, well, how do you procure in this place for this? You sort of have this corporate memory which says, well, this is a way we do it, which in some ways is very useful because it's established you have to innovate every time, but it also can stymie innovation or trying to do it a different way, or to have that appetite to go, okay, well, does that actually do what we want it to do? And you need a certain level of openness and it's not even risk taking really. It's just doing it in a different way. And I think that can be actually a barrier to using frameworks, is that people are told this is a way we do it and you want to do it this way because it protects you from these sort of things, but then you're not necessarily thinking about, well, if we did it another way, there'd be advantages of doing that new way, but that can almost feel like more effort, even if the established route is painful and doesn't actually deliver quite what you want it to deliver. So I think that, from my very limited perspective, would be one barrier that I've come across. And I don't want to talk forever because it's dull, so I'll just give you one.
Thanks, Andrew. That's really helpful. My next question is around SMEs, and we've sort of, Rehan, you touched on this a little bit, not necessarily of SMEs, but specifically kind of your work with Dragonheart Homes and the Reducing Reoffending partnership. But the question is from Mike Doolan. SMEs play a vital role in building out smaller sites. How can we reverse the trend of these SMEs leaving the sector? So I'd love to hear from you, from your kind of perspective, Rehan, like what your thoughts are on kind of SMEs leaving the sector, and Tony as well, from you, in terms of managing various suppliers on a framework. How do we enable SMEs and help stop them leaving the sector actually? But Rehan first, please.
It's a great question. We are an SME, and we are firmly rooted in this sector, and we do need those frameworks, and we do need the industry and the clients to realise as well that SMEs have played a vital role in the construction of the UK to date and will continue to play a vital role. So having recognition for SMEs is critical. And I think also on the back of, when you look at SMEs, we do seem to go that extra mile in terms of the quality, in terms of the level of technology and what the hoops will jump through and the hurdles will go through to deliver those highest levels of quality, because we feel like we've got something to prove. We're not cookie cuttering large 100 unit, 200 unit, 300 unit developments. We're aggregating those smaller developments into delivering a build system that works. We need, it's recognizing the role and having sort of elements within the frameworks that actually acknowledge that we are delivering high levels of social value, but we need those levels, that social value, to be looked at, because we're not in here for the race for the bottom. We're here for the race for the highest level of quality and the best level of service. So SMEs can provide that, and I think recognizing that will keep SMEs into the industry.
That's really helpful, Rehan. Tony, what about from your perspective?
Well, I think one of those things for the SMEs is aggregation of demand, program of work. You know, historically, organisations have found a site. You know, they'll go out and get planning on that site, and once they've got planning, they'll go out and procure it, and then they'll go out and procure another site. So actually, you know, what the housing festivals do, trying to get that aggregation together, is actually being able to put, you know, a few of those sites out to as a package to an SME, so that over the next couple of years they know where they're getting the work from, which then drives the social value, because they can invest in the people because they know where the work's coming from. So, you know, a lot of this, you know, social value can be, you know, bells and whistles, but actually employing local people and getting companies to employ local people, which are then spending their money in the local area, is probably one of the, you know, biggest ones you can get. So I think getting that program of work together, and this is where having that conversation about procurement, because if you're under the procurement regs, if you've got a program of, you know, 30 sites, in theory you lump all those sites together and go out and procure them, and it might be, you know, 200 units, so you'll end up looking at the total value of that and going out to a massive contractor who then turns around and says, I don't want to do all those small sites, thank you very much. So it's how you approach the market and say, well, actually, we'll clump together a number of smaller sites together, give those to somebody. So, you know, taking Andrew's point, we've got 30 sites. I want these delivered quickly, but I can give a smaller contractor, I'll give you 5 of these sites, and you've got to deliver them over the next 2 years and break it down. So you end up with 6 different people working on those, and perhaps you know, that's where you work together to say, well, these are all suitable for the particular solution, particular contractor, geographically, that will work there. You know, so it's looking in that context of, and I think that's how you keep people in the business, is that they don't have to keep going through that procurement process. You know, because you've got to bear in mind that it's a pain for you as a client, but it's a pain for the contractors as well. You know, and from their point of view, they're doing this. You know,
the challenge is
they might only win 1 in 10 contracts that they bid for. So it's a lot of time and effort, particularly for the smaller guys, because they've got their jobs to do. And you find sometimes it's the directors or other people that are working in the evenings and things to pull together contracts. And I think that's part of what we found as well, is working with people like Jake to say there are opportunities, because that's always the thing with a framework. There's always that health warning on it that you may not get any work out of it. So
yeah,
and for the small guys, it's saying, well, what's the point in doing that? If I got a contract from somebody that I know I'm going to get some work out, I will focus on that. And I think the other thing as well is making sure that we don't overcomplicate the procurement. You know, because you can do all these bells and whistles, you know, competitive, flexible, you can have interviews and all sorts of things, but most contractors will say, actually, I just want one set of documentation, let me fill it out, and you tell me whether I won. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. Jake, were you going to
comment? I think there's also, I think the challenge is like we've got a massive appetite to support SMEs, but conversely, there's also a different risk profile that we have to look at. You know, how secure are we with contracting on a scheme to deliver some houses where the credit rating is not as much as, you know, maybe our kind of our terms of reference kind of look at, and our hurdle rates look at. So there's a sort of balance, isn't there? And there's a real sort of tension between supporting but also putting your own business at risk, and that can be quite a difficult kind of conversation to have. You know, supporting, offering local value. By default, you could employ a major contractor and all of their subcontractors underneath for SMEs. So you're supporting SMEs indirectly, but you're not kind of giving it directly to an SME. So you've removed that level of risk. So there's appetite certainly from Abri, but there's also that kind of conversation around what is our risk appetite and how far do we go in that support, and what does that look like?
Yeah, that's great.
Just touching on the risk, I'd say one thing we found when we procured the framework, which was the traditional MMC, where we had contractors, you've got good regional contractors as well, which have got quite large turnovers. Whereas a lot of the MMC suppliers are still quite small. Even something like Portakabin I think they got turnover about £60 million, and they're one of the biggest modular manufacturers in the country, which is still smaller than a lot of the regional contractors that you got. So again, working with those regional contractors is how you split down the opportunities in the framework, but also bringing in some of those smaller builders through things like DPSs, where you can actually get them involved because they're actually more willing to deliver it. And if you've got another level of management in, it's just additional cost for the project. And what we always try and do is make sure we allow people to select the type of project and the areas they want to operate in, particularly, say somewhere like the Southwest. If you keep that as a complete region, everybody wants to work in Bristol, but the further west you go, you get less and less people. And suddenly when you're in Cornwall, there's not that many people, so again, you have to look at where people are saying, and this has been historically a problem with a lot of manufacturers. Yeah, we can put anything on the back of a lorry, but have you got the people in the wellies when it comes to the other end to actually do all the work that's required as well? So it's about that supply chain and management of that, and making sure those people have got the capability to deliver in that particular area as well. So working with localized contractors is a way to get around that, because they can deliver in that region.
Yeah, absolutely, Tony. I'm very aware that we are running rapidly out of time, and we've got a lot of questions that we have not been able to answer, which is a shame. But I'm not gonna leave you. I'm not gonna keep you all here longer than we promised. So we will finish dead on at 2 o'clock. So panelists, before we go, I'd love to have your sort of 20-30 seconds kind of final reflections, or kind of takeaway point, let's say, in a moment, but I will give you a moment to think on that as I wrap up. But thank you so much to everyone that's come and has listened to our panelists and our discussion. It's been really interesting. Thank you so much to our panelists for agreeing to be part of this conversation. It's been great to talk about this and start to get under the skin of this as an issue, and I feel like we've only just begun to scratch the surface. I feel like we're just all beginning to warm up, and the questions, as I say, have just been coming in thick and fast. If you're one of the people that have asked a question that hasn't been able to get answered, please don't despair. We would love to follow it up with you. So after this webinar, the recording will be available, and we will kind of share email addresses, contact details for us for Building Better for Housing Festival. And so if you want to follow up with your question, and we can put it directly to the panelists and make introductions for you, so you can follow those up as you wish. So do please get in touch with us with those contact details as well, and let us know if you'd like to have your question followed up after the session. But for now, it really does just leave me to look to our panelists and say, what are your final reflections? Let's come to you first, Jake.
Yeah, we are all custodians in our current position in whatever role we're in. We have to do something. We have to change. We have to stimulate that. We have to drive that. And MMC and delivering different alternative methods of construction for housing is a must. So we need to drive that and exercise that, and speaking and open up conversations with all of us to share challenges, obstacles, and how we drive this sort of forward, I think is the key to this. So the plea would be, don't leave this behind. We are custodians. Think about the future, not just today.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jake. And Rehan.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, looking at from an SME perspective, looking at someone that's focused on delivering the highest quality homes, sort of the lowest environmental footprint in the most efficient way possible, and using MMC and modulars that way forward, we want to incorporate those whole life aspects and those cost and performances. But don't underestimate the value of the people within the process. So people like Tony Woods, people with your framework providers, rely on them, use them. They are, that they vet us as much as they vet the projects and our capabilities. rely on them to make, to put you in contact with the right type of people and help with that procurement process. Because as Jake said, we are custodians of our own area of it, and it takes all of us working together to be able to deliver anywhere close to 1.5 million homes within this parliament. So, we need everyone to work together, and procurement is an incredibly important part of that.
Thank you, Rehan. And Andrew?
Thank you, Jessie. Procurement, I think, is an ability to formalise a desire to work in partnership, and when there's partnership, there's equal ownership. And so, I think the at its worst, when you enter into a contract, you then hide behind it when something goes wrong, and try to play the blame game. Really, what you want is the ability to overcome every obstacle at all costs and find a route through in partnership, and to see it more as a formalisation of a partnership agreement rather than a contract, I think would be my top thing. Make it your problem always as a client to find a solution.
Nice, thank you, Andrew. And Tony?
Yeah, I was going to say with MMC, we always talk about early engagement, with suppliers, and I think early engagement with procurement. So going back to Andrew's point, you're working in partnership with the procurement to find the solution at the speed that you want it to go at, and turn it around. That early engagement with the supply chain as well gives you that value engineering and drives everything through the process as well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, panelists. Thank you so much, guests. Thank you for being here. We're going to call it there. Thank you so much. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Cheers.
Thank you.